In the heart of ancient Egypt, beneath the golden light of the Nile's eternal sun, a child was born who would shape the destiny of an empire. His name, Ramses. Son of Seti I, heir to a divine lineage, and destined to become not just a king, but a god among men. Egypt, in the 13th century BCE, was at the height of its power. The new kingdom had forged a vast empire, stretching from the deserts of Nubia to the shores of the Mediterranean. Pharaohs were more than rulers, they were the living embodiments of the gods, the bridge between heaven and earth. Ramses entered this world of power and ceremony around 1303 BCE. From his earliest years, his life was shaped by destiny. His father, Seti I, was a strong and capable ruler who restored Egypt's strength after years of turmoil. Under Seti's watchful eye, the young prince learned the ways of leadership, how to command armies, oversee construction, and honor the gods who sustained Egypt's greatness. Even as a boy, Ramses was marked by ambition. His tutors described him as intelligent, fearless, and fiercely proud. The priests whispered that he carried the favor of Ra, the sun god himself. The boy grew up surrounded by the splendor of the royal court, towering temples, golden statues, and vast halls decorated with stories of divine kingship. But Ramses' childhood was not without challenge. The Egyptian empire, though mighty, was surrounded by threats. To the north, the Hittites, a formidable power from Anatolia, were expanding their reach. To the south, Nubian tribes tested Egypt's borders. To rule Egypt was to command not only faith and ceremony, but also the sword. Seti I understood this well. He took Ramses on military campaigns even before the boy reached manhood. In dusty chariots, beneath banners of gold and red, Ramses witnessed firsthand the discipline and might of Egypt's armies. He saw cities conquered, temples erected in the pharaoh's honor, and the awe of conquered peoples before Egypt's divine king. These early experiences carved something indelible into Ramses' soul, a vision of eternal glory. He came to believe that greatness was not inherited, but forged in the fires of conquest and legacy. When Ramses was still young, Seti I appointed him as Prince Regent, a rare honor that marked him as chosen successor. This was more than a title, it was a declaration to the gods and the people that Ramses was the future of Egypt. As Seti aged, Ramses' influence grew. He oversaw temple projects, led military expeditions, and began to establish his own royal identity. The boy who once rode behind his father's chariot now commanded legions of his own. When Seti I passed away, Ramses ascended the throne at around 25 years of age. It was the beginning of one of the longest and most magnificent reigns in human history, a reign that would last more than 6 decades. To his people, he became Usurmator Setipenra, the justice of Ra is powerful, chosen of Ra. To history, he would be known as Ramses the Great. But his path to greatness was not one of peace. His first years as pharaoh were consumed by war, campaigns that would test his courage, his cunning, and his destiny to rule the world's greatest empire. As dawn broke over Thebes and the temple drums echoed through the Nile Valley, the young pharaoh raised his eyes to the sun. The gods had chosen him, and he would answer their call, not as a servant, but as their equal. The legend of Ramses the Great had begun. When Ramses II took the throne, Egypt stood at a crossroads. The empire was vast, its temples glittered with gold, its fields overflowed with grain, and its people worshipped their divine ruler with unwavering devotion. Yet beyond Egypt's borders, the world was restless. To the north, in the rugged lands of Anatolia and Syria, a rival empire stirred, the Hittites. They had grown powerful, their armies hardened by conquest, their kings ambitious. Between Egypt and the Hittites lay a land of cities and fortresses, Canaan, Amurru, and Kadesh, regions rich in trade, wealth, and strategic power. Whoever controlled these territories would hold the key to domination in the ancient Near East. Ramses, young and untested, knew that the gods demanded more than mere defense. He would not be remembered as a caretaker of his father's empire, he would expand it, glorify it, and stamp his name upon the world. In the 5th year of his reign, the drums of war thundered once again across the Nile. Ramses assembled one of the most formidable armies Egypt had ever seen, divided into 4 divisions, each named after a god, Ammonius, Ra, Ta, and Set. Each division numbered thousands of infantry and hundreds of chariots, glimmering beneath the desert sun. At their head stood Ramses himself, the living image of Horus on earth. The campaign to the north began with triumphs. Egyptian forces swept through Canaan, crushing resistance and reaffirming Egypt's supremacy. Cities that had once wavered between Hittite and Egyptian influence now bowed again before Pharaoh's might. But Ramses' true goal lay further ahead, the fortress city of Kadesh, perched upon the Orontes River. Kadesh was the jewel of the north, a stronghold of immense strategic importance. It had changed hands many times between Egypt and the Hittites. Ramses intended to reclaim it permanently, to carve his glory upon its walls and announce to the world that Egypt still ruled supreme. In the spring of 1274 BCE, Ramses led his army deep into Syrian lands. But as he approached Kadesh, fate and deception awaited him. 2 captured nomads were brought before the pharaoh. They claimed the Hittite king, Muwatalli II, had fled north, terrified by Ramses' approach. Confident of an easy victory, Ramses advanced swiftly, his Ammonius division far ahead of the others. It was a trap. The nomads were Hittite spies, and the enemy was not far away. They were hidden behind the hills, waiting. As the Egyptian camp was being set up, the ground trembled. From the north, the Hittite chariots, more than 2,000 strong, burst forth in a thunderous assault. The surprise was complete. The Hittites crashed into the unprepared Egyptian camp, scattering soldiers, overturning tents, and cutting through the lines. In that moment, chaos reigned. The pharaoh himself was nearly surrounded. But Ramses was no ordinary king. He was trained for war, raised in battle. Climbing into his chariot, he seized his bow and charged straight into the enemy. Ancient inscriptions later carved on temple walls would tell how Ramses, like Montu, god of war, fought with fury unmatched. He rode through the storm of battle, his arrows cutting down the Hittites one by one. Reinforcements from the Ta division finally arrived, turning the tide. The Egyptians regrouped, pushing the Hittite chariots back toward the river. Many were crushed or drowned in the chaos. The day ended in stalemate. Neither side held the field, but Ramses' survival became legend. The Battle of Kadesh would echo through history as one of the greatest chariot battles ever fought. Both sides claimed victory, but in truth, it was a battle of endurance, a test of will between 2 empires at their peak. For Ramses, the outcome was clear in his heart. He had faced death and triumphed by divine courage. In the years that followed, he continued his campaigns into Syria and Canaan. Fortresses were taken, cities rebuilt, and Egypt's influence reasserted. But the endless conflict drained both great powers. After nearly 2 decades of tension, Ramses sought a new path, peace. In the 21st year of his reign, he and the Hittite king Hattusili III signed what is considered the world's first recorded peace treaty. It was a document of extraordinary significance, carved in stone and written on silver tablets. It declared that neither side would invade the other, and that both kings would come to each other's aid if attacked. It was not only a treaty of survival but of wisdom. Ramses had learned that glory was not only won on the battlefield but preserved through diplomacy. The peace brought stability to the region and allowed him to turn his energy toward the second half of his reign, an age of monumental construction and divine grandeur. With the sword sheathed and the borders secured, Ramses returned to Egypt. But the land that awaited him would soon be transformed. The pharaoh would now turn his gaze from conquest to creation, from the destruction of war to the eternal beauty of stone. He would build like no ruler before or after him. Temples would rise to the heavens, statues would dwarf men, and his name would be carved deeper into history than any other. The warrior was about to become a god of architecture. When Ramses II returned from his northern campaigns, Egypt entered a new age. An age of peace, prosperity, and unprecedented grandeur. The land had been secured, the borders fortified, and the gods appeased. Now, the pharaoh turned his mind toward immortality. In ancient Egypt, to build was to live forever. Every stone laid in the name of a pharaoh was a prayer against time. A statement to the gods that the ruler's spirit, or Ka, would never fade. Ramses understood this truth more deeply than any before him. He would not merely rule Egypt, he would rebuild it. The scale of Ramses' ambition was beyond comprehension. From the delta in the north to the Nubian deserts in the south, his name would adorn countless monuments. He envisioned a new capital, a city fit for the god-king of the world. Thus rose Pi-Ramses, the house of Ramses, great in victory. Built near the old city of Avaris in the eastern delta, Pi-Ramses became the beating heart of Egypt's empire. It was vast and magnificent, a city of grand avenues, palaces gleaming with gold, and towering temples to Ammonius, Ra, and Ptah. Its walls echoed with the sounds of artisans, soldiers, and priests. Tens of thousands of laborers working day and night to shape the pharaoh's vision. Here, Ramses ruled not as a distant monarch, but as a living god. Ambassadors from foreign lands marveled at the splendor. The city was built with purpose, it stood close to the northern frontier, allowing Ramses to command his armies and watch over his empire's gateway to Asia. But Ramses was only the beginning. Throughout Egypt, he undertook construction projects on a scale unseen before. Temples were expanded, statues erected, and obelisks raised, each carved with inscriptions proclaiming Ramses' divine power. He restored the great temples at Karnak and Luxor, honoring the gods who had guided him to victory. He added new colonnades, decorated walls with reliefs of his battles, and filled every corner with his image. In Thebes, he built the Grand Ramesseum, a mortuary temple dedicated to his own eternal worship. It was not merely a temple, it was a statement of divine kingship. Massive statues of Ramses stood before its pylons, each over 60 feet tall, depicting him seated upon his throne, gazing serenely into eternity. On the temple walls, scenes from the Battle of Kadesh played out in vivid detail. Ramses in his chariot, bow drawn, scattering the Hittites like dust. These carvings were more than art, they were propaganda, a message carved into eternity. That Ramses was invincible, chosen by the gods, and beloved of Ra. Yet even as his builders worked along the Nile, Ramses' vision extended far to the south, to the rugged cliffs of Nubia, where he would create his most enduring masterpiece. At Abu Simbel, deep in the sandstone mountains near the border of modern Sudan, Ramses commanded the creation of two colossal temples. One was dedicated to the gods Ammonius, Ra-Horikti, and Ptah, and to Ramses himself as a god among them. The second, smaller yet no less sacred, was dedicated to his beloved queen, Nefertari, the one for whom the sun rises. The main temple at Abu Simbel was carved directly from the mountainside. Four colossal statues of Ramses, each over 65 feet tall, guard its entrance. Their faces calm, immortal, gazing forever upon the rising sun. Inside, vast halls lined with pillars lead into the sanctuary, where, twice each year, the sun's rays pierce the temple's inner chamber, illuminating the statues of the gods. And Ramses himself, seated among them. This alignment was no accident. It was the work of divine geometry, a masterpiece of ancient engineering that ensured the pharaoh's face would be touched by the light of Ra for eternity. Abu Simbel was not just a temple, it was a message to the world. To the Nubians to the south, it proclaimed Egypt's might. To the gods, it declared Ramses' divine union with them. And to time itself, it was a challenge, that even the mountains would bow before the will of the great pharaoh. Everywhere one turned, the mark of Ramses could be seen. He commissioned more statues, temples, and monuments than any ruler before or after him. Historians estimate that over half of all surviving temples from the New Kingdom bear his name. His inscriptions were carved over those of earlier kings, not out of disrespect, but as a declaration that his reign had surpassed all others. For the Egyptian people, these temples were not mere structures. They were living embodiments of the pharaoh's power and piety. Festivals and ceremonies filled the air with music, incense, and prayer. Priests offered daily sacrifices in Ramses' name, invoking him as both king and god. As years turned into decades, Ramses' empire flourished. Trade routes stretched far beyond Egypt's borders. Gold from Nubia, cedar from Lebanon, and lapis from distant lands flowed into the treasury. Egypt basked in the radiance of prosperity, its people secure under the shadow of their eternal pharaoh. But even as his temples reached for the heavens, Ramses knew the truth that haunted all kings. That time spares no mortal. And so he built, endlessly, feverishly, as though he could outlast death itself through stone and inscription. He had become not just a ruler, but a symbol, the embodiment of Egypt's golden age. And in the deep silence of his monuments, the echo of his ambition still whispers. I am Ramses, beloved of Ra. My name shall endure for 1,000,000 years. In ancient Egypt, the line between the divine and the mortal was thin. And no one walked it more confidently than Ramses the Great. To his people, he was not merely a man who wore a crown. He was the living embodiment of Horus, the falcon god of kingship. And upon his death, he would become Osiris, lord of the afterlife. To speak Ramses' name was to invoke divinity itself. From the earliest days of his reign, Ramses understood that power in Egypt was more than armies or monuments. It was spiritual. The gods were the foundation upon which all authority rested. And Pharaoh was their voice, their earthly vessel. He alone could intercede between the heavens and the people. But Ramses did not merely accept this role, he expanded it. Where earlier pharaohs had acted as servants of the gods, Ramses made himself their equal. His images across Egypt did not show a humble king before the gods. They showed him standing beside them, offering sacrifices to himself, and sharing their divine attributes. At Abu Simbel, his colossal statues were carved at the same scale as the gods inside the temple. At Luxor, he inscribed texts calling himself the Son of Ra, the one whose monuments will last forever, like the stars of heaven. Every relief, every statue, every inscription reinforced a single idea: that Ramses was not simply chosen by the gods, he was one of them. To many Egyptians, this was not arrogance, it was reassurance. Their world was ordered, secure, and prosperous because the gods walked among them. The floods of the Nile came each year, the harvests were plentiful, and the temples overflowed with offerings. In such abundance, the people saw proof that their pharaoh was favored by the divine. The temples, too, reflected this sacred balance. Each great sanctuary built under Ramses was not only a monument to his glory but a home for the gods. Priests served daily rituals, awakening the statues of deities each morning, bathing them in perfumed oils, and clothing them in fine linen. Incense filled the air as chants echoed through stone halls, ancient hymns that connected the mortal world to eternity. Ramses' relationship with the priesthood was one of careful control. The temples of Ammonius at Thebes, Ra at Heliopolis, and Ptah at Memphis held immense wealth and influence. Their priests were powerful, their rituals ancient and complex. Yet Ramses ensured that ultimate authority always remained with the throne. By lavishing the temples with gifts, gold, cattle, land, and slaves, he secured both divine favor and political loyalty. In return, the priests proclaimed his sanctity. In hymns and carvings, they praised Ramses as the son who gives life to Egypt, the bull mighty in strength, and the everlasting ruler whose years are countless. Through their words, he was not simply a king, he was cosmic order made flesh. The Egyptians called this order Ma'at, truth, balance, and harmony. It was Ma'at that kept the stars on their course, that caused the Nile to rise, that bound heaven and earth together. And Pharaoh's sacred duty was to maintain Ma'at against the forces of chaos. Ramses became the personification of that principle. He ruled with the conviction that every decision, every conquest, and every monument was an act of divine balance. When he smote enemies on temple walls, it was not cruelty, it was cosmic justice. The triumph of order over disorder, of Egypt over the chaotic world beyond. Even in private devotion, Ramses' faith ran deep. He commissioned hundreds of statues not just of himself but of the gods he worshipped. He offered daily prayers to Ammonius Ra, thanking him for victory and guidance. He honored Ptah, the creator god, for granting him wisdom in architecture. And he revered Ra-Horikti, the sun in his full glory, whose journey across the sky mirrored Ramses' own journey through life, from youth to kingship to immortality. His queen, Nefertari, also shared in this divine aura. She was not merely consort, she was goddess incarnate. In the temple at Abu Simbel built in her honor, she is depicted as Hathor, the goddess of love and beauty. Her image stands equal in size to Ramses, an extraordinary gesture in Egyptian art, symbolizing that she too was part of the eternal order. Through these divine portrayals, Ramses and Nefertari became eternal partners in both love and divinity. The living reflection of Osiris and Isis. The union of king and goddess that sustained Egypt's soul. The festivals of Egypt during his reign reached unparalleled splendor. At Thebes, during the Opet festival, statues of Ammonius, Mut, and Khonsa were carried in golden boats down the Nile. Crowds gathered along the riverbanks to see the gods travel from Karnak to Luxor, where Pharaoh himself awaited to renew his divine essence in a sacred ritual of rebirth. Each year, Ramses was symbolically renewed as the living Horus. His strength restored, his divinity reaffirmed before all of Egypt. For 67 years, these ceremonies continued. A rhythm of faith and power that reinforced the cosmic order he embodied. Through his devotion, his construction, and his rule, Ramses sustained Egypt's connection to the divine. But beneath the brilliance of divine kingship, time continued its quiet march. Even gods who walk the earth must one day return to the heavens. The great pharaoh's body aged, though his spirit remained unyielding. He had outlived his enemies, his builders, and even many of his own children. Still, he stood firm, the eternal king of a timeless land. And as his twilight years approached, Ramses turned his gaze toward the mysteries of death and the promise of eternal life. The final chapter of his divine journey. The crossing from the world of men into the realm of the gods. Behind the power and the temples, behind the crown and the divine image, there was another side to Ramses the Great, the man, the husband, the father. His public life was eternalized in stone, but his private life was woven from the tender and human threads of love, loyalty, and loss. The heart of Ramses' domestic world was Queen Nefertari, the great royal wife. Her name meant the beautiful companion, and she was exactly that, graceful, intelligent, and politically astute. Nefertari was more than a consort, she was a symbol of royal harmony, a partner in both faith and rule. Together, they embodied the divine union of Osiris and Isis, the sacred balance of male and female power that sustained the cosmos. From the earliest years of his reign, Nefertari held a place of unparalleled honor. Her images appear beside Ramses on temple walls, an honor few queens ever received. In her own temple at Abu Simbel, she is depicted as the goddess Hathor herself. A radiant presence standing beside her husband, equal in grace and dignity. On the walls of her tomb in the Valley of the Queens, hieroglyphs and paintings still whisper the story of their love. The artwork is among the most beautiful in all of Egypt, vibrant blues, reds, and golds illuminating the afterlife journey of a queen beloved by both her husband and the gods. In those delicate brushstrokes, Nefertari is shown not as a mortal but as a celestial being. Welcomed by Isis, Hathor, and Anubis into the eternal paradise. Her death came early in Ramses' reign, and though the pharaoh would take other wives, her memory endured. For decades afterward, he spoke of her, honored her in festivals, and ensured her name was sung in the hymns of Egypt. In the deep silence of her tomb, the love of Ramses and Nefertari transcended time. A love written not in words, but in the language of eternity. Yet Ramses' household was vast. As was the custom of kings, he took many wives, both Egyptian and foreign. Some were daughters of nobles, others were princesses sent from distant lands as part of diplomatic alliances. Among them were Isetnofret, Bintenath, and even princesses from Hatti. Gifts of peace after the signing of the Great Treaty with the Hittites. Each queen held her own court, her own attendants and children, but Nefertari remained the symbolic heart of Ramses' dynasty. Her sons and daughters, alongside those of other queens, formed a royal family that was as immense as it was complex. Ramses fathered over 100 children. Princes who served as generals and priests, and princesses who became priestesses, consorts, and guardians of divine ritual. Among his sons, the most prominent was Amunias-Her-Khepeshef, his firstborn and the original heir. He was trained in warfare and governance, riding in his father's chariot during campaigns and leading troops under his command. But fate was cruel. Amunias-Her-Khepeshef died young, leaving Ramses to mourn the loss of his chosen successor. After him came Ramses, another son who briefly served as crown prince. Followed by Marenta, who would ultimately inherit the throne after Ramses' long reign. Marenta was already advanced in age when he became pharaoh. A testament to how long his father lived and ruled. Life within the royal palaces of Pyramus was a spectacle of luxury and devotion. The city thrived with activity, processions, banquets, and religious ceremonies honoring the pharaoh's divine household. Each morning, servants brought offerings of fruits, incense, and fine linen to the royal shrines within the palace. Musicians played harps and flutes while dancers moved gracefully before golden statues of the gods. Yet beneath this grandeur lay the deep humanity of family life. Ramses was known to be affectionate toward his children, often depicted holding their hands or allowing them to stand beside him in temple reliefs. He took pride in seeing his sons grow into leaders and his daughters become embodiments of grace and wisdom. In one famous depiction at Abu Simbel, a procession of his sons stands behind him, each carved in careful order of age. A line of succession etched into stone, symbolizing the continuity of divine kingship. Their names and titles fill the walls, immortalizing them alongside their father's image. Ramses' daughters also held exceptional positions in his court. Bintenath, his eldest daughter, became a great royal wife later in life. A gesture not uncommon in Egyptian royal tradition, meant to preserve the purity of divine bloodlines. Other daughters, such as Meritamen and Nefertari, were high priestesses and wielded influence in temple affairs. Through his vast family, Ramses created not just a dynasty, but a living reflection of his own immortality. Each child carried forward a spark of the divine essence he claimed from the gods. In their names, Egypt's future was secured, for as long as the line of Ramses endured, so too would his legacy. But time, even for kings, brings loss. Ramses outlived many of his children and queens. He watched generations rise and fade, his household renewing itself like the cycle of the Nile. And though grief touched him many times, he remained steadfast, anchored by his divine purpose and by the eternal vision that guided his reign. As he aged, the pharaoh's palace grew quieter. The voices of his sons echoed through its halls, now leaders of temples and armies in their own right. Yet in the stillness of night, as the stars reflected on the waters of the Nile, one can imagine Ramses looking toward the south, toward Abu Simbel, where the colossal statues of himself and his beloved Nefertari gazed eternally toward the rising sun. Their love, their union, their dynasty, all stood as proof that Ramses' world was not only built on conquest or ambition, but on devotion, family, and the divine harmony of life and death. In Nefertari's memory, Ramses found immortality not only as a god of stone, but as a man whose heart once loved deeply. And in that love, he was truly great. Far to the south, where the Nile carves its way through the deserts of Nubia, Ramses II conceived a vision unlike any the world had seen. It was a vision not of war, nor of politics, but of eternity. Here, in the sandstone cliffs of the sacred land, he would carve his legacy into the bones of the earth itself. The temples of Abu Simbel were not merely monuments, they were messages, written in stone, destined for the gods and for time itself. Ramses sought to remind the world, both mortal and divine, that he was not just a king, but a god incarnate. He commanded that 2 colossal temples be built, one for himself, and one for his beloved queen, Nefertari. The cliffs thundered with the sound of hammers and chisels. Thousands of laborers, artisans, and engineers toiled under the burning Nubian sun. Stone dust filled the air, blending with the chant of overseers and the rhythmic beat of wooden mallets. Every stroke of the chisel was a prayer, every block a testament to Ramses' vision of immortality. The great temple rose first, a wonder of balance, precision, and divine symbolism. Its facade stood 100 feet high, dominated by 4 seated colossi of Ramses, each over 60 feet tall, gazing across the Nile with timeless majesty. Their faces were serene, godlike, not of a man, but of an eternal being. Each statue bore the crown of Upper and Lower Egypt, a symbol of unbroken unity and power. At the feet of these giants, smaller carvings depicted the royal family, queens, princes, and princesses, dwarfed by the monumental presence of the pharaoh. It was a statement in stone, all life revolved around Ramses, as the stars revolved around the sun. Inside, the temple descended into shadow and sanctity. The corridors led to a series of halls supported by massive Osirid pillars, each shaped in the likeness of Ramses himself, arms crossed, holding the scepter and flail, the emblems of divine kingship. The walls came alive with carvings of Ramses' victories, his chariots charging at Kadesh, his enemies trembling before his might, and his offerings to the gods. But the true genius of Abu Simbel was not in its size, but in its celestial alignment. Twice a year, on February 22 and October 22, the rising sun pierces the temple's inner sanctum, illuminating 3 of the 4 seated gods upon the back wall, Are-Horikti, Ammonius-Are, and Ramses himself. Only Ptah, the god of darkness, remains in shadow. It was not coincidence, it was design. Ramses had ordered the temple to commune with the cosmos itself, ensuring that his divine image would be touched by the light of the sun for eternity. Beside the great temple stood the smaller, yet equally magnificent temple of Hathor, dedicated to Nefertari. It was one of the few temples in Egyptian history where a queen was depicted equal in size to her husband. Nefertari's statue stood shoulder to shoulder with Ramses, a rare and powerful tribute to love and partnership. The inner walls of her temple glowed with delicate carvings, Nefertari offering flowers to Hathor, the goddess of beauty and motherhood, while musicians played in devotion. It was a softer vision of eternity, not of conquest or divine wrath, but of grace, harmony, and affection. When the temples were finally completed, the pharaoh journeyed to Nubia in grand procession. Priests carried incense, soldiers lined the causeways, and the air trembled with hymns to Ammonius Ra. Ramses stood before his colossi, his likeness towering above him, and proclaimed that his name would endure for 1,000,000 years. The temples of Abu Simbel were more than monuments, they were acts of resurrection, built to defy the erosion of time. And yet, millennia later, when the Nile rose under the waters of the modern Aswan Dam, it was as if fate itself conspired to test that promise. But Ramses' defiance of time continued. In the 20th century, engineers from around the world came together to move the entire temple, stone by stone, to higher ground, preserving his eternal dream. The gods of Egypt smiled once more, for Ramses' voice still echoed from the cliffs. Abu Simbel stands today as a testament not only to Egypt's might, but to a man's will to be remembered forever. The pharaoh who saw himself as divine carved his immortality in stone, and time, obediently, bowed before him. In ancient Egypt, kingship was more than a throne, it was a bridge between worlds. The pharaoh was the living embodiment of Horus, the falcon god, and upon his death, he became Osiris, lord of the afterlife. But in Ramses II, this divine nature reached its most magnificent expression. He was not content to be a ruler favored by the gods, he became one. As his empire flourished and his temples reached toward the heavens, Ramses cultivated an image of divine kingship unlike any before him. Through art, architecture, and ritual, he wove himself into the very fabric of Egypt's faith. To see Ramses was to see the gods. To worship him was to worship the divine order itself. His statues towered across Egypt, in Thebes, Memphis, Abu Simbel, Luxor, and Pyramus, colossal forms carved in stone and sanctified by ritual. Each bore inscriptions proclaiming him, the son of Ra, beloved of Ammonius. He was depicted offering to the gods, yet also receiving offerings from them, an eternal circle of devotion, merging mortal and divine. Priests across the land invoked his name in daily rites. Temples built during his reign dedicated entire chambers to his worship, often depicting him seated among the great deities of Egypt. Ramses' image appeared beside Ammonius Ra, Ptah, Horus, and Thoth, as if he were their equal, a god among gods. But this was not mere vanity. To Ramses, divine kingship was a sacred duty. He believed that Egypt's stability, its very heartbeat, depended on his unity with the gods. He was the Ma'at, the cosmic balance, the order that kept chaos at bay. Through him, the Nile would flood, the sun would rise, and the crops would grow. If he faltered, the world itself could fall into disorder. And so, Ramses performed the role of the god-king with unmatched devotion. He led festivals, offered sacrifices, and celebrated the Grand Opet festival, a journey of renewal between Ammonius' temple at Karnak and the sanctuary at Luxor. The pharaoh's golden bark glided along the Nile, surrounded by priests chanting hymns, while the people rejoiced on the riverbanks, believing their king's presence renewed the life of the land itself. To his people, he was the living Horus, chosen to rule for eternity. To foreign powers, he was the thunder of Ra, the unshakable pillar of Egypt's divine order. Within the temples, walls came alive with imagery of his spiritual triumphs, Ramses kneeling before Ra-Horikti, embraced by Ammonius, or crowned by Ptah. The line between mortal and god blurred, until it vanished entirely. He became a myth while still alive. Even the names he bore were sacred invocations. Usurmator Setipenra, the justice of Ra is powerful, chosen of Ra. Ramses Mary Ammonius, born of Ra, beloved of Ammonius. Each title echoed through the halls of eternity, a divine proclamation of his role in the cosmic order. In the city of Pyramus, his chosen capital, this divine presence was most visible. It was not just a city of stone, but a living temple, filled with obelisks, colossal gates, and courtyards that shimmered with gold and blue tiles. Priests performed daily rituals in his name, hymns praised him as the eternal ruler. Even foreign ambassadors were required to address him with reverence, as one would approach a god. Yet beneath this celestial grandeur lay a human truth. Ramses was not blind to mortality. He saw the passing of time, the aging of his body, and the death of those he loved. He knew that even the mightiest pharaoh could not escape the silence of eternity. And so, he turned divine kingship into a shield, a way to outlast death itself. By becoming a god in life, he ensured he would live as one in death. His temples would be his heart, his statues, his immortal body, his name, his soul. The Egyptians believed that as long as a name was spoken, the soul endured. And Ramses built an empire of memory. His name was carved on every monument, every stela, every block of stone. Even his successors, unwilling to challenge his greatness, left his inscriptions untouched. His presence became eternal, imprinted on the face of Egypt itself. Through his reign, the idea of divine kingship reached its zenith. Ramses II blurred the line between men and God so completely that, even thousands of years later, his image commands awe. He is not remembered merely as a ruler, but as a living myth, a man who reached for eternity, and grasped it. Behind the golden mask of kingship, behind the thunder of war and the echo of temples, there lived a man, a husband, a father, and a lover of beauty. Ramses II, though immortalized as a god, was surrounded by the warmth of family, the affection of his queens, and the laughter of his children. And among them all, one name shines brightest through the corridors of time, Nefertari. She was not merely his consort, she was the beloved of the great royal wife's throne, a woman whose grace inspired poets and whose wisdom matched the pharaoh's own. To Ramses, Nefertari was the embodiment of Hathor, goddess of love, beauty, and the sky. He called her, she for whom the sun shines. And for her, he built one of the most breathtaking monuments in Egypt's history, the Temple of Hathor at Abu Simbel. In that sacred place, Ramses ordered that her statues stand equal in size to his own, a gesture almost unheard of in ancient Egypt. It was not only a display of devotion, but a declaration that love itself could be divine. Within the temple walls, Nefertari appears offering flowers and music to the gods, radiant and eternal. There, the queen and goddess merge, both adored, both everlasting. Nefertari was more than a symbol of beauty. She was a diplomat, a confidant, and a partner in empire. Inscriptions suggest that she may have written letters to foreign queens and advised Ramses during delicate negotiations. Her intelligence and elegance made her one of the most revered women in Egyptian history. But even the immortal are not spared the touch of time. Sometime early in Ramses' reign, Nefertari passed away. Her death left a silence that even the roaring Nile could not fill. In her honor, Ramses ordered a tomb of unparalleled splendor, the QV66, or Tomb of Nefertari, in the Valley of the Queens. Its walls are alive with color, blues, golds, and deep reds, portraying her journey into the afterlife. There she stands, forever youthful, guided by the gods she once honored on earth. It remains one of the most exquisite tombs ever discovered, a chamber of love frozen in eternity. Yet Ramses' household did not end with Nefertari. He had many wives, both royal and secondary, and more than 100 children. His family was as vast as his empire, a living dynasty that filled palaces and temples with their presence. Among his many sons, Kamwaset stands out, a prince of wisdom and devotion. He became the high priest of Ptah in Memphis and earned renown as the world's first known archaeologist, restoring ancient monuments from Egypt's past. Kamwaset's reverence for history mirrored his father's desire for eternal remembrance. He once wrote, "I love the monuments of the ancestors, I would preserve their names from oblivion." In this, he was truly his father's son. Ramses also honored his children with statues and reliefs. They are seen marching behind him on temple walls, miniature yet noble, witnesses to his everlasting glory. His daughters, too, were cherished, especially Bintenath, who became great royal wife later in his reign. The royal family became both a political and spiritual symbol, a divine household reflecting the harmony of the heavens. And yet, within all the splendor, there was humanity. The great pharaoh, worshipped as a god, still felt the tenderness of love and the pain of loss. When he visited Nefertari's tomb, one imagines him standing in the torchlight, surrounded by paintings of her radiant face, the eternal queen who still smiled through the silence of stone. For all his wars and monuments, Ramses' greatest creation may have been his legacy of love. He ruled through faith and power, but his heart belonged to those he held dear. His family was his mirror, a reflection of the empire he built, vast, vibrant, and eternal. Even now, when the desert winds whisper through the ruins of Abu Simbel, one can almost hear his voice, not as a conqueror, but as a husband calling to his beloved across time. For you, my queen, the sun shall rise forever. Must one day dip beneath the horizon. By the time Ramses reached his 80th year, his hair had turned silver, and his back bore the weight of eternity. He had lived longer than almost any pharaoh before him, and outlived most of his wives and children. The once young warrior who charged into battle at Kadesh now walked slowly through the halls of Ramses, leaning on his staff, surrounded by priests, scribes, and grandchildren who called him the Great Ancestor. His city, Ramses, thrived as a jewel of empire. It was a metropolis of color and sound, temples shimmering in gold, canals filled with barges, markets alive with music and trade. Foreign ambassadors from distant lands came to bow before him, offering gifts and pledges of peace. Egypt, under his long reign, had become the envy of the ancient world. In his twilight years, Ramses no longer sought conquest. He sought immortality through legacy. He commissioned inscriptions recounting his triumphs, not as a boast, but as history carved in eternity. He ordered the restoration of older temples, ensuring the names of forgotten kings were remembered once more. To Ramses, remembrance itself was divine, for memory was the soul's anchor against oblivion. He visited Thebes, the sacred city of Ammonius, where his own colossal statues still guarded the temples of Luxor and Karnak. There, beneath the rising sun, he offered incense to the gods who had guided his life. In the quiet of the sanctuary, one imagines him speaking softly to Ammonius Ra. I have served your light, O Father of creation. Let my name live as long as the Nile flows. Though his body aged, his spirit remained unbroken. He continued to lead ceremonies, issue decrees, and preside over festivals. The people of Egypt saw him not as an old man, but as a living god, the eternal pharaoh who had ruled beyond human years. But within the stillness of his final years, Ramses became reflective. He had seen the wheel of time turn, seen greatness fade and empires crumble. He knew that even the strongest stones would one day erode beneath the desert winds. And yet, he believed his legacy would not vanish, because he had bound it not to earth alone, but to the heavens themselves. He often visited the temples of his ancestors, Seti I, Thutmose, and Amenhotep, walking among their sacred halls, tracing the hieroglyphs that told their stories. He understood now what they had all sought, not power, not wealth, but eternity through remembrance. To be remembered was to never truly die. His tomb, KV7 in the Valley of the Kings, was prepared with care and reverence. It was vast and deeply carved, its chambers painted with scenes of the pharaoh's journey through the underworld. There, Ramses would meet Osiris, weigh his heart against the feather of truth, and take his place among the gods. In his final days, Ramses was not surrounded by warriors, but by priests and family. The empire he had forged was stable, peaceful, and prosperous. His people revered him not out of fear, but out of love and awe. He had ruled for 66 years, longer than any pharaoh before him. When he finally passed, Egypt wept. Temples fell silent. The priests of Ammonius and Ra lit incense in his honor. His colossal statues, scattered across the land, seemed to gaze toward the rising sun, as if even the stone mourned the departure of its master. They laid him to rest in the Valley of the Kings, wrapped in gold and linen, surrounded by treasures and prayers. But his rest would not be eternal. Centuries later, looters broke into his tomb, scattering his remains. Yet fate had another plan, for his body was rediscovered in the 19th century, preserved and moved to the Cairo Museum, where it rests even today. And though the flesh has withered, his face, strong, regal, defiant, still carries the mark of a god. More than 3,000 years after his death, Ramses II still commands reverence. He lives on in the temples of Abu Simbel, in the columns of Karnak, in the memory of his people, and in the imagination of history itself. The twilight of Ramses was not an ending, it was a transformation. The mortal king returned to the realm of the gods, his name shining brighter than ever. As the sun set on his earthly reign, it rose again in the heavens, carrying the soul of Ramses the Great, eternal, radiant, divine. 3,000 years have passed since the sands closed over the tomb of Ramses II. Empires have risen and fallen. Languages have changed, cities have crumbled, and gods once worshipped have faded into myth. Yet through it all, one name endures, a name carved in stone, written in light, and whispered by history itself. Ramses the Great. From the golden dawn of the New Kingdom to the modern age, Ramses' shadow has never left Egypt. He remains the symbol of an age when men built for eternity, when stone and spirit merged to defy the decay of time. His temples still stand, the faces of his colossi still watching over the Nile, the sun still touching his statue at Abu Simbel twice each year, just as he commanded. To the ancients, he was the embodiment of divine kingship, the god who walked among men. To scholars and explorers, he became the pharaoh of memory, a bridge between legend and history. When his mummy was discovered in 1881, lying in a secret cache at Deir el-Bahari, the world was astonished. His body, dried and wrapped in linen, still bore the strong features of a man born to command. Even in death, Ramses looked unyielding, his jaw set, his hands crossed in eternal authority. When his remains were examined in the 20th century, scientists marveled. They found traces of age and ailment, arthritis, worn teeth, and old battle scars, but also a vitality that seemed to echo the power of his spirit. In 1976, his mummy was even flown to Paris for preservation, treated with the respect of a head of state. As his coffin was carried through the airport, soldiers saluted, and the French government officially welcomed him, 3 millennia after his death. The God King had traveled once more among mortals, and the world bowed again before Ramses the Great. Yet his true immortality lies not in relics, but in legacy. Every pharaoh after him sought to imitate his grandeur. They adopted his titles, rebuilt his temples, and aspired to his vision of divine kingship. Even centuries later, when Egypt's glory dimmed and foreign powers ruled its lands, the name of Ramses remained sacred, a golden echo of what Egypt once was. In modern times, archaeologists and historians have come to see Ramses as the architect of Egypt's identity. His reign was a masterpiece of stability, a balance of war, faith, and artistry. He preserved Egypt's borders, enriched its cities, and ensured that its gods were worshipped from Nubia to the Mediterranean. Under his rule, the arts flourished, architecture soared, and the spirit of the Nile shone brighter than ever before. But Ramses' legacy extends beyond history. He has become a mythic archetype, the eternal ruler, the builder of wonders, the man who defied time. His image inspired emperors, poets, and explorers. When the English poet Percy Bysshe Shelley wrote of a fallen statue in the desert, "My name is Ozymandias, King of Kings," he was speaking of Ramses. The irony of those lines, the broken statue standing in the sand, only deepened the mystery. For even as the stone eroded, the name endured. The temples of Abu Simbel, once buried by shifting dunes, now stand preserved by modern hands, a miracle of human unity and remembrance. Moved stone by stone in the 1960s to escape the rising waters of the Aswan Dam, they continue to tell his story to the world. Ramses' dream of immortality succeeded, not through divine magic, but through the awe he continues to inspire in every soul who looks upon his works. Today, when the sun rises over the Nile and touches the face of his statue, it is more than light upon stone. It is the promise of a man who conquered death, whose name has outlasted the sands, the storms, and the centuries. In museums, tourists stand before his mummy in reverent silence. Children learn his name in classrooms. Filmmakers, historians, and dreamers still speak of his reign with wonder. Ramses has become not only a figure of the past, but a mirror of human ambition, the eternal desire to leave something behind that time cannot erase. For in the end, that is the true legacy of Ramses II. He showed that greatness is not measured by years or wars, but by the endurance of memory. He built not just monuments, but meaning, carved in every block of stone, written in every beam of light that enters his temples. And as long as the Nile flows, as long as the sun rises over Egypt, his name will live on. Ramses the Great, son of Ra, builder of eternity, lord of the two lands, the pharaoh who became a god, and whose shadow still walks the sands of time.